Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody here today, Standing Committee on Social Development. We are here with the Minister of Housing. We're getting a public briefing on the Housing Strategic Renewal with Minister Cochrane, Honourable Minister Caroline Cochrane. Before we move forward, I'll get the members to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Mr. Blake.
Good morning, Frederick Blake, MLA for Mackenzie Delta.
Morning, Tom Bowley, MLA for Tuneda-Willowday.
Good morning, Danny McNeely, Sato Region.
Good morning, Julie Green, Yellowknife Center.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Good morning, RJ Simpson, MLA Haverford North.
Good morning, Shane Thompson Handy. On my left is Megan Welsh, our policy analyst, and on my right is Jennifer Frankie Smith, our clerk of the court, our clerk of our committee. At this point in time, I'll turn the floor to the Minister, Minister Cochrane, who will start with opening comments, and then you'll direct me who's going to do your presentation. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Committee, for allowing the opportunity to provide more information on the strategic renewal activities of the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. With me today are Mr. Tom Williams, my Deputy Minister, Franklin Carpenter, who's the Vice President of Programs and District Operations, Revi Laue, the Director of Policy and Planning, and in the back is Mr. Jim Martin, who's our Vice President of Finance and Infrastructure Services. I'm going to try to speak really fast because I want to give time for the presentation. There are numerous initiatives being pursued, and our formal presentation will review them. I do want to highlight, however, two activities that I'm especially proud to have supported that set the stage for communities to shape their own housing futures. We will begin and continue until the end of our mandate of this Assembly to develop community housing plans. This level of planning is a long-awaited tool for communities. Communities develop emergency management plans, land use plans, economic development plans, and other plans. Communities should also have housing plans. The Housing Corporation will facilitate the development of these plans by compiling all the relevant housing information, such as land availability, core need, seniors and single need, homelessness, and rental and home ownership markets. This information will be presented to community leaders and residents. The Housing Corporation will record the discussions of community members and will assist communities in drafting their own plan. These plans will be owned by communities, and they will be supported in the ongoing implementation of these plans. Community housing plans will not only give a formal voice to community residents on the priorities that they see going forward, they will provide structure for all orders of government as they continue future housing investments in those communities. This will be especially important as communities may have other opportunities for partnership when the federal national housing strategy is released. Dovetailing with this planning is the introduction of the Community Housing Support Initiative, which provides flexible partnership opportunities for community Indigenous governments. These partnerships may include a contribution agreement, grant in kind such as material packages, or logistical and project management support. This program gives communities the ability to develop innovative housing projects of their own design. I also anticipate that this program will allow for leveraging with any co-investment programming that the federal government may release under the National Housing Strategy. Although full details of the National Housing Strategy are yet to be shared, what I do know is that the federal government will expect jurisdictions to cost match the federal government investment. These two initiatives, I feel, will give communities the tools to shape the future of housing in their communities. Now I wish to turn it over to Mr. Tom Williams, President and CEO of the NWT Housing Corporation, to give a short presentation on the numerous activities categorized under the Strategic Renewal. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I now turn it over to Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As members may be aware, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation developed a strategic framework in 2012, Building for the Future, Northern Solutions for Northern Housing, which laid out a number of long-term aspirational goals as well as specific actions towards meeting those goals. Those priorities priority activities were completed and new activities needed to be developed to make further progress on the goals of the strategic framework. This was the impetus for strategic renewal. Moving on to slide 2. At the onset of this project, an internal committee was struck to develop a work plan. This group comprised of every functional area of the corporation, including representation from our community partners, the local housing organizations. Their first task was to implement the Housing Engagement Survey, which garnered responses from approximately 1 in 10 NWT households. The results of this report provided direction into the review of programs and led to the recommendations for possible changes. Moving on to slide 3, areas of exploration. Numerous sources of inquiry fed into the direction of the strategic renewal, including the Housing Engagement Survey, program demand, mandate commitments, political commitments, ministerial BFs, NWT Housing Corporation, and local housing organizations' input, the federal national housing strategy priorities. And as the minister noted, issues raised by MLAs on behalf of their constituents. Slide 4, review principles. In reviewing operations and policy, we wanted to ensure that we were looking at areas that were most relevant to our current environment, including the mandate of our assembly and future possible directions of the federal government. We looked at how successful our programs were in terms of specific outcomes, especially in the context of core need. Lastly, we wanted to ensure that our activities represented good value for money. Slide 5, time frame. Our work on the strategic renewal will continue all the way to the end of our mandate. We will report on any future areas that could not be addressed for the consideration of the next government. Slide 6, implementation and approval. Depending on the level of change, it may be appropriate to inform or seek approval of various decision makers. Slide 7, quick wins. The minister has already spoken to the Community Housing Supporting Initiative. This has garnered much interest from the Indigenous and community governments. This program is a stepping stone towards the direct management of housing by Indigenous self-governments. The Seniors Aging in Place retrofit program supports the GNWT mandate commitment to assist elders to remain in their home community. Projects will improve energy efficiency or make houses more durable. The NGO Rental Support Program. This program leverages and builds upon services provided by NGOs to their target groups by providing NGOs a flexible fund to increase residents' housing stability. The Rent Supplement Program has been revised, taking lessons from the successes and challenges of the former Transitional Rent Supplement Program. The Fuel Tank Replacement Initiative helps address the cost of living by protecting homeowners from expensive environmental remediation of failed fuel tanks. Customer service training. I personally have taken this training along with my senior management committee. The training has since expanded to all aspects of our operations, including our community partners, the local housing organizations. Family home transfer. In recent years, there has been more cases of people having to move to regional centers to access specific health care, such as kidney dialysis. When these folks own a house in their home community, it can be difficult accessing affordable housing, such as public housing or income support rental allowance in the regional center that they have moved to. The corporation has developed a simple transfer agreement between the family that helps ensure that the house in the home community continues to be used and does not become vacant, and that individual that needs to leave the community will be able to access government-supported housing. Students in public housing. The corporation has made changes to its public housing policies to ensure that when people leave the community to access schooling, that they do not lose their priority for public housing in their home community. Home ownership repayment suspension. When a resident has a forgivable loan with the corporation and they need to leave their home communities due to unforeseen circumstances, they will not be in default of their loan with their repayment schedules just being put on it'll be put on a freeze. Social housing evaluation. Under the terms of the social housing agreement with Canada, we are required to evaluate public housing program in a set time period. This evaluation, which is being conducted, coincides with the strategic renewal and may result in useful recommendations for improving the public housing program. Another study being conducted is the seniors planning study, which will determine seniors housing, how much seniors housing is required by community and what sort of features do they need. Slide 8, future area of expansion. The following areas that I'll note in the following slides are topics that have been identified for review and research from a variety of sources. Some of these activities may have already been in planning and pre-implementation phase. Others may be still under analysis and evaluation. Slide 9, midterm. Client training online. The webpage renewal is required on a personal basis. It has been identified that more resources are required for online, including training for renters and homeowners. This work has already begun. The minister spoke to the need for the value of community housing plans. Development of plans for the first few communities will be initiated in this upcoming fiscal year. As decision makers for your communities, you'll be invited to participate in any planning activities. A housing support worker is being piloted in Betchico, which we anticipate will be an important resource to help vulnerable families retain their housing. It's also hoped that the intervention methods tested and employed will give us insight on how to scope this support to other communities. Website improvement, something that we heard for a number, all my tenure in Housing Corporation. We're committed to make improvements in the website. As I noted, our web page is an important resource and it needs to be useful and easily accessible. We approached the NWT Literacy Council for a partnership in a renewal of our website. Seniors moving incentive. Some seniors are reluctant to move out of their public housing units where they may have resided for a long period of time, even though they may now be over-accommodated. The corporation will look at ways to encourage seniors to consider the option of supported independent living centers, which they have their own self-contained suites and provides greater security and accessibility features. The larger home could be then reallocated to larger families. Homelessness programs. A study will be conducted to determine gaps, duplication, and areas of improvement under the GNWT's overall response to addressing homelessness. This study will span all Government Northwest Territories departments and agencies that are involved in addressing homelessness. Allocation for public housing units are determined by priority based on a point rating system. As part of the strategic renewal, this point rating system will be reviewed to determine whether it is still meeting the objectives. The housing corporation or cooperatives, housing cooperatives have been a successful model for affordable housing, especially in southern jurisdictions. The corporation is conducting a review of this model, including northern examples, with a view of the development of options for expanding the use of this model in the NWT. Emergency overnight shelters. In the context of the homelessness review, the corporation will be working with the Department of Education, Cultural and Employment to determine any potential improvements in the administration of support for emergency overnight shelters. Slide 10. Access to repair programming, land security issues. As requested by a number of communities, the corporation is working with other G&WT departments to determine solutions for accessing repair programming with uncertain land tenure. Obtaining home insurance can be a barrier for many homeowners, especially in the rural and remote communities. The corporation will be looking at potential actions to address this barrier. In the past, residents residing in public housing, but that are not on the lease, may have been in a gray area when the signed leasee is no longer in the unit. An improved policy will clarify the process for tenants to sign a new lease. Self-employment in public housing. Public housing units are not to be used as a place of business, especially as subsidized rent may unduly affect competition in an industry. However, with respect to some activities such as traditional crafts, exceptions will be made to support self-employment, especially in rural and remote communities. The corporation will be instituting a procedure for identifying alternative uses for assets that remain vacant for a certain period of time. Slide 11, in the long term, the following areas remain conceptual at this point, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into each of them in detail. I should note that we are looking at ways to improve the sustainability of home ownership in rural remote communities. As members are aware, there are very few hardware stores, Journey certified plumbers and carpenters in many of our small communities. Resources such as these are important for ensuring that homeowners can succeed. So we'll look at possible options in this regard. Additionally, the federal government will likely be introducing a portable housing benefit that may be administered by provinces and territories. If so, we'll need to work with the federal government in the program design of this program and ensure that it aligns with the current NWT housing supports. Slide 12. There are some further areas of exploration that might lead to specific actions. As the minister has said all along, we're reviewing all our policies, all our programs to improve housing conditions in the Northwest Territories. So that concludes my presentation, and we're open for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. I have a couple things here. The first one is about running businesses out of homes. I know the minister and I sort of talked about that yesterday in question period. But when it comes to legitimate businesses, running them out of a housing unit and banning that, it almost seems like when someone makes too much money on income assistance, they start cutting back. Disallowing the use of a home to begin a small business, it sort of seems like it might be hampering people who are trying to take that first step to doing something more. So was that a consideration in this when looking at this policy? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochrane.
So as stated by Mr. Williams, that is a policy that we are still tackling. We haven't really gotten to that point. Right now, currently, it says no businesses can be, so we are looking at it. But we have to make sure that we're fair within that, and remembering that public housing is supposed to be for lower income families. So currently, we have some families that are making like $100,000 in public housing units. And that might not be a home business, but we do need to look at that whole range and say, at what point do they need to be moved into market housing? You know, if people have a small business that is prosperous, making money, should they be in public housing is my question. So we're not there yet. We'll be looking at it.
Mr. Simpson.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is at the beginning stages of it, before it's a profitable business. My next question is something that comes up all the time in Hay River. Mr. Williams mentioned the lack of journeymen in small communities. We have them. There's a lack in Hay River as well. People get approved for housing programs. Sometimes they put their money down. You know, there was a co-payment. They got an $8,000 co-payment, and it's been sitting there for years, and the work hasn't been done yet because there's no qualified people to come and do the work. So, and I know that housing used to be much more actively involved in training journeymen, and that seems to have fallen by the wayside. So what is housing's plan to address that issue? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochrane.
15? Do we have 15 apprentices?
Up to 15, yeah.
Okay. So the Housing Corporation has up to 15 apprenticeships, and I recognize that it isn't enough as well. We are hoping that, the problem is that there's not enough money to go around. We have workers in every community almost with the local housing organizations. We're providing, contract stuff. We're kind of the catch-all. We've become the catch-all for everything. We're the economic development center in most communities now. So apprenticeships are important. We're hoping that we will be able to eventually expand on it. We need to look at it. We are hoping that now that the federal government's talking about giving money to Aboriginal governments, such as the Inevaluate Regional Corporation, that we can work with them to actually build up apprenticeships within their communities, because they're getting more money that we would have had in those communities. So we're working with them in partnership to see if they can actually bring on apprenticeships in their regions so that they can train people, because you're right. We need more people that are trained in the fields. It's not okay that we're having to bring people from outside communities and sometimes outside regions to be able to do the work.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Ms. Green.
Thank you. I want to congratulate you on all the new initiatives that you have. I feel that by having a lot of them, they appeal to different kinds of situations, and that makes the Housing Corporation more responsive to people's needs. I want to look at the bigger picture. So your presentation said when the housing strategy is released, but it was released in November. So I'm wondering if you could clarify what's happening with the National Housing Strategy with the Housing Corporation. Thank you.
Minister Cochrane.
Yes, so there was a release in November. I'm not sure if that was the date. I'm taking the member's word for that because things come fast. Oh, right, okay, you're right. It was released, and the federal budget came out yesterday as well, but they haven't defined. So they've given numbers and amounts, but they haven't really defined how that will look. So we're still negotiating with them to make sure that the needs of the Northwest Territories are met. I have huge concerns still. The National Housing Strategy is too vague. The budget that came out is giving Indigenous monies to Métis Nation, which our Métis Métis bands are not part of. Inuit, which means IRC, which is great, and on reserve, which means that because even IRC, Inevaluate Regional Corporation, is only like half of a community, it means that the majority of our communities are not going to get that money. So I'm still fighting. I'm still fighting with the federal government to make sure that we are heard. And we're partnered with the Yukon government and the Nunavut government as well in our battle with Ottawa. And I don't like to say battle, but at this point it's almost becoming that, because I've been going down steady. We've been writing letters steady, and I feel like we're not being heard. We are a small population. We don't carry a lot of vote power. But, I mean, people that know me is I'm not willing to not be heard. So I'm going to keep fighting this battle until they hear us and provide for the people of the territories properly. Absolutely.
Thank you,
Tom will.
Minister Cochrane. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Next week, actually, we do have a FPT DM meeting in Whitehorse, and hopefully we'll get some light shed on the rollout of the National Housing Strategy. The big item is the multilateral framework on how the money will flow and what programs are available, so we'll get better insight. And at some point, if there's full endorsement from the table from all jurisdictions, we'd be coming back through our cabinet to get approval to agree to the multilateral framework. There's a minister's FPT meeting tentatively scheduled for sometime in April, where decisions will be made on the rollout. So we're looking forward. We're anxious. Like, there's a lot of missing detail, as the minister alluded to, and hopefully we'll get some of that detail next week in Whitehorse. But certainly it's, we look forward to the rollout. I think there's going to be some new programs that we could leverage money for. So, and the rollout to the Nunavut, to the Inuit groups that was announced in the budget yesterday or 2 days ago, it's certainly, it's an opportunity, a huge opportunity, because it's incremental money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mrs. Green.
Thank you. What I see happening here is that the federal government is allocating money to Indigenous organizations without taking into account that Indigenous people are a majority of the NWT and that we have a public government here. And so somehow we're falling in between the cracks of the money they want to forward to Indigenous people without taking into account a different mode of serving Indigenous people through public government. I don't know how you're going to get that through to them. But I would appreciate you keeping the committee up to date on what you learned from your FPT meetings. This is obviously really key to meeting your commitment to core housing need and implementing all your initiatives. Thank you.
More of a comment, Ms. Green. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think that the community development housing plans and the contribution agreement, a couple of things pointed out in the minister's opening remarks are very positive. I think they're something that's would be very good for the development of housing in the communities. Of course, I'm interested in the time frame and implementation of those, and I guess that's something that's for our committee to continue to pursue. I like the whole view of your insurance. I think that's important to move forward. I would recommend that you stay with the self-insurance as opposed to buying insurance. I think that's the reason insurance people sell insurance is because they make a lot of money. So if you just self-insure, I think it would be better. If somebody's house burns down, you'd look at the current situation, either put him in public housing or he becomes eligible, and if he has a debt, it's written off, as opposed to buying him insurance. That's what but that's something that you guys will sort out. So I just going back to the whole idea of the community housing development plans and contribution agreements. I think that many of the communities where you're indicating a lack of skilled workers, many communities have a lot of skilled workers. However, so some communities I know, I know I could go to Tutsalka, I might have only 2 guys there that can actually build houses, but I might have 20 guys in Fort Res that can build houses. So they, it's an opportunity for them to trade, and I think that Yellowknife, the 2 communities that attach Yellowknife can access that. But this whole idea of contribution agreement, I think, is something that's almost essential in order for us to move forward, because I think that that'll allow the communities to make a decision on what are the priorities of their community. Having reviewed the community development plan that I'm assuming you guys would put together with the communities, I think that the contribution agreement will give them a good area where they can, an area that they need to work on. As an example, in expanding the aging in place program, which I think has lots of benefits, lots of social benefits, and lots of benefits to government and so on. So I think that the stuff you guys are doing is going in the right direction. It's my opinion that if you stay the course, that eventually you'll see the housing Courtney go down substantially, because this is a type of approach that has made Courtney go down in the past. Where you're allowing communities to make decisions with lots of opportunities, different programs, lots of different views on what they could do and so on. So just say, to me, this sounds very supportive and very positive, and looking forward to how it evolves. Thank you.
Mr. Bolio, a comment, but I'll turn it over to the minister should you wish to comment on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I too, like my colleague Ms. Green here, will compliment the department, to the minister and the staff here for really what I think you're doing great things to make a difference in the small communities. And I just didn't dream up this statement here, but I'm going to have a statement on housing here. I think if you add 3 levels of government, as you mentioned, there's resources available to the Indigenous community. And let's just take the Sahtu, for example. Okay, you got 3 stakeholders. You got the federal initiatives with the resources that they announced, and you've got your territorial government initiatives, and you've got the local land corporation initiatives. So I think if we design a model through a regional conference to develop a strategic plan based on the core need that you've done, which gives inventory concerns and demands out there. So put them all together, I think we can develop a real good regional program financed by the initiatives that are made available. And when I visit the website on the federal program here, the federal budget the other day, last year, as you recall, okay, the IRC got 15 million. You know, that's good. I compliment them for their hard work and initiative and bearing results. And then again, underneath the Inuit announcement, they're going to have another pot of money. So that's good. And you give compliments to where compliments are due. So come April on your rollout results, I think what you're doing is right. Shaking the red alert tree will bear and fall fruit. And I hope you can have several baskets here come April. So I just point that out, continue with the good work and help share. The information is only as good as when it trickles down to an implementation plan in the community. And that's where I'm going to be going with all this information. I don't want it to just sit in this room. I want it to be delivered, implemented in inland communities like Cove Lake and Delaney. They only have one access to big road, big heavy load traffic, not the winter road traffic, the heavy loads. They only got several days. So if we can design and meet that schedule, that window, we can have material in Delaney, in Cove Lake. The other communities like Fort Good Hope and Norman Wells and Toledo, they're on the riverbank. Okay, they missed the truck train, not a problem. We'll get you material on the barge in June. So there's a second option for mobilization of materials. So that's, I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Mr. McNeely, more of a comment again, Minister? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would like to commend the department. There's a lot of good changes that are being made here in the last couple of years, and you know, constituents really appreciate that. One of the ones that had a number of issues with was family home transfer, and you know, I'm glad the department is working with families, especially that lose loved ones, that you know they like to keep their homes and within the family. And one thing that keeps coming up, I know it's a little bit of a touchy issue, but the home ownership programs that go out to the communities, I think we need to do a little more work on that. You know, a good example is, say you live in a Clavik, but the couple makes, say, 120 to 150,000, which may sound like a lot, but when you're living in a community like a Clavik, which is isolated a good portion of the year, you know, the cost of living up there is so expensive, and a lot of times you don't have money set aside for home repairs. And you know, majority of those houses there were part of the HAP program in the 80s. So you know, it is time for those homeowners to fix up their homes, but they're kind of stuck right now because they don't have enough funds set aside to take care of that cost. You know, we're looking at, say, 50,000 or in that area, just as an example. You know, say they want to change a roof or change all the windows and things like this, but you know, they don't have enough to do that on their own, and they're looking for some sort of program that would help them do that, because you know, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you know, they want to fix up their homes, but you know, they just don't have the funding, and you know, they don't mind cost sharing, but you know, they're hoping a program comes out to help them in this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister Cochrane.
Sorry, the home ownership was one of the things we did look at. It's not in here, actually. It used to be that the policy was if you made $20,000 a year, you had to pay 10% towards repairs. And like I've said many times, nobody making $20,000 a year can afford anything, not even food, never mind paying towards repairs. And if they are, they're doing something illegal to make more than $20,000, most of them. So we changed it to anyone under 60,000 will have zero co-payment, because that is reasonable. And then after that, it's a sliding scale. We can revisit it again, so I can commit to that. I'm not saying I'm going to change it, but we can revisit it again to make sure that we are being equitable to the different regions, especially the northern regions where it is more expensive. Thank you. Oh, yeah,
You,
Tom.
Minister Cochrane, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we recognize there are the core need income thresholds. They've been in place for a while. We're certainly, one of our priorities is to review the core need income threshold. So make it more available, remove some of the barriers for homeowners that they could access our programs. Because right now, you know, the times have changed. These were developed years ago, so it's something that we have to keep up with the times. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other thing that came up a couple of times was, I know a couple of years back, there was a program between housing and I think it was the Arctic Energy Alliance to replace wood stoves, and you know, they went throughout the communities changing the stovepipes and everything just to make it up to code. And you know, people are really appreciated that, and there's still a few more to do. And I'd like to know if there's plans in the near future to continue that program, because you know, if you don't change out the chimneys often, then could lead to house fires. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that the need for people to have their chimneys cleaned out and to be checked in, that would fall within our preventative maintenance program, which again, if they're under the core needs income threshold, they would actually be able to qualify for. So a matter of just spreading the message. We recognize we also need to work on better communications. That's part of our work as well. One thing I do want to note is that when you look at, like I've laid out my papers in front of me, so we're doing a lot. When I came here, I didn't come here to play politics. I came here to get the work done, and housing was a number one need, and I heard that the first year. I could have sat behind and said, I'm going to do a study. I don't know if these are best practices, because I didn't do the study. I just heard from people. I could have said I'm going to do a study and cross-jurisdictional and look for outcomes and get best practices. I should have said I'm going to do a framework and actually figure out what we need. I maybe should have said I'm going to do an action plan and do it. But if I would have done all those things to make sure that I was up to get into best practices, I wouldn't get anything done in 4 years. So these initiatives, like I say, there's a lot if you open up your pages. Some of them might not work. I really want to say that. I'm hopeful all of them will. They're based on the voices of people, the MLAs, and our surveys. But I also want to qualify that they are not based on well-known best practices at this point, because they're new initiatives to the territories. It's Northern Voices making Northern housing. So I apologize in some way that I didn't do the background research, but I found out that 4 years goes really fast in government, and I just don't have time to do it. I don't want to wait for another 4 years and have a nice framework and a nice action plan, and hopefully the next minister that takes over housing might implement them or might put them on the shelf. So in that way, I do want to apologize that we are rushing, but I seen the need to rush, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, and Mr. Williams would like to.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The member raises a good point, you know, putting wood stoves, looking at alternative heat sources in our homes. You know, we have to reduce the carbon economy, so it's something that we're working on towards, looking at biomass, looking at other ways to reduce fuel consumption in our housing units. So I know that program that was run through the Arctic Energy Alliance to install wood stoves, it was a popular program. They were all wet certified, so they met insurance purposes. So it's something that we have to seriously consider as we move forward as a housing corporation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister Cochrane, I think you could be doing the lead on best practices after we implement some of these great things and see success. So, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment at the beginning. Arctic Energy Alliance, that's my member statement today. Problem is they don't have enough money. And they've run out again for some of the programs here in Yellowknife. And you need to work with your colleague, the Minister of Infrastructure, to get more money in there. But I want to look or turn to communications. Well, first off, look, I think you guys are doing a good job. You're heading in the right direction. So, like other folks have said. On communications, I see that the website is sort of a midterm goal of increasing that you're working with the Literacy Council. That's a good thing because we need to have plain language on there. And I think there's been some improvements made to the website, but I'll just give you an example. Fuel tank replacement initiative. There's a description of it. It says a one-time forgivable loan of up to $10,000 available. But you can't click on a form to fill it out. There's no contact information on here. Who do you contact? That's the kind of stuff people need on the website so that they can click open a form, they can print it off, or who do they go and talk to? You got a list of some staff, you got some nice profiles in there, but you need like a list of phone numbers, names of people that in each of the communities, so if someone wants to follow up, they know where to go. So I'm going to encourage you to try to maybe get to that as soon as you can, because to roll these programs out properly, you need to have the information available on your website. And so anyways, I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if there's any response the minister or the staff want to make, but great ideas here, but for people to access this stuff, the information has to be available on the website, and it's not right now.
Mr. O'Reilly, Minister Cochrane.
First, and then
Oh, you go and then.
Okay. We're both anxious. We love what we're doing. I want to say that the quick wins are things that we've done that are implemented. The midterm things are the things we're working on right now. The communications, we recognize it is something we're working on right currently. It's not only the website, it's not all community members and smaller communities have internet, so it's also getting the word out. So we've already been talking about this last week or so on how do we get it in the newspapers, how do we get it to the community members so they know our programs. So yes, we recognize that communications is an area, it's a focus right now, and I will take note of your concerns, because you're right, we need to have the forms online and we need to have contact information. And I think Mr. Williams, who's as excited as I am, wants to add on to that, if he may.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Just before I turn to Mr. Williams, utilize the MLAs as well as to get out that information, because we can hit other people that you may or may not get out there. And so, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, no, the member makes a good comment there. You could have all the best programs in the world, but if you don't communicate and how to access them, then I think it is an issue. But what we do, we rely a lot on face-to-face communication. Our staff go to wellness fairs, partnering with Health and Social Services. We always have a booth there. We have our pamphlets, our brochures, and we have the face-to-face contact with clients. Most recently at the NWTAC meeting in Hay River, we had a table there for the interactive sessions. I participated in it, and there was 28 of the 33 communities there that I think we were one of the most popular tables in the room there, that people are coming up to know what our new programs are. And we were relaying the materials that had the contact information, how to access the program. So, we're committed to fix our website, and I agree with you. It has to be more interactive website and more useful for our clients. But face-to-face is a good way to promote our programs. And we do have a communication strategy as we roll this out that, we're hitting some of the markers now where we will be doing publications in the paper and getting more and more communications out as we roll out our new programs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's good stuff. Maybe you can share the communications strategy with the committee, just so we have a better idea of what's going on, and we can help too. I know that you guys did provide us some information, some links and so on the strategic renewal stuff. I put it on my Facebook page, so yeah, I want to move on though to federal funding, and you know, the minister tabled in the House towards level ground report that looked at what it would cost to get our housing out of core need. Good report, and I, you know, I was certainly suggesting that this is something you need to do, because we need the case to give to the federal government to get money out of them. This is part of it. I know we might have to repackage this in different ways. Presumably, we're going to get some of this work funded through the National Housing Strategy, but I keep pushing the minister. We need to access the infrastructure programs and the climate change programs, federal funding, to help pay for this work. Because this is good work, but there's no way of paying for it. It's good that this is costed. So what kind of progress are you making in terms of accessing, not the National Housing Program funding, however that rolls out, but the federal infrastructure programs and climate change programs to help get this work done? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I believe all departments actually sit on the work that is actually applying for the infrastructure monies that is coming in at the end of March. I believe it's supposed to be announced. So we all have say in that, but you have to remember that there's a lot of departments competing for it. So we're putting our needs forward. The other thing, and my department doesn't even know, so yes, the Towards Level Ground is a base document, and it's actually tailored so that we can actually work on it with the other territories as well, that we can go and advocate for the three of us, but our own needs. It's a start. And my department doesn't know, but Mike McLeod actually just contacted me yesterday as well. So our MP, Mike McLeod, has been a huge advocate for housing as well. I couldn't ask for a better MP at this point. And he's asked me just last night for proposals because you haven't even been told this, guys, but and I could show you my text that he says, send me proposals because he's fighting for it and he wants to get in there as well. So so we're using whatever methods we can, including our MP, and we will be developing. Just letting you know, you guys, by Monday, I promised Mr. McLeod, Michael McLeod, that you will have proposals. So Revy, there goes your weekend. Sorry. Yeah, and then Tom would like to add again, so.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the member has raised some good points. We need additional funding, resources from the federal government. If we could tap into these, it's a win-win. We are part of the ask for the climate change funding, part of the ask that the GNWT has put forward. So we do have funding requirement there that we have identified to help deal with climate change in our infrastructure. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that we get our fair share of the money. But again, it's a GNWT ask. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Yep, thank you, Mr. Williams. I just have a couple comments and then a couple questions here. I support, I think the department, or the corporation's doing some really good stuff, and I'm excited about that. The thing is with community plans, I'm hoping you're working with the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs. Maybe talk to that minister, because, you know, they're gonna have community plans, so it should be interwoven together so that they're working together on that. So I would hope you do that. In regards to regional indigenous governments, have you guys been working with them to come and put proposals together? Because I know IRC has put something together, but in my conversations with other people, there's an opportunity for regional governments to actually, indigenous governments to tap into this as well. So have you been working with them on that? Minister Cochrane.
Thank you. So yeah, there's a couple of things. Of course, we're doing the community support program where they work in partnership with us. That's what you were going with. But the bigger point is, yes, we're working with MACA because it makes sense. Like I've told Housing and MACA that if we're doing community planning with MACA, then housing is a critical part of community planning. So it I couldn't believe that we weren't doing that before. So yes, we're working closely with MACA, and I congratulate that minister as well for doing a great job working with us. I have to take it where I can. And the regional governments, every community that I've gone into, I've been talking to regional governments and saying, Aboriginal governments, and saying you need to put your voice to the federal government. They need to hear that they're not being, that they need to be considering the North in a different context when they roll out this Indigenous money. We were just talking, was it yesterday, about our next, the time goes so fast. It was just yesterday we were talking about our next run down to Ottawa and trying to lobby for getting them to hear our needs for Indigenous governments. And we were just saying that we would like to, so this isn't on the record yet because we haven't even sent out the invites. I'd ask the committee to keep this confidential. We need to invite the community governments first, but, huh? Oh, it's a public meeting. Okay, well, for those who are hearing now, we will be sending out invitations to Aboriginal governments, probably one per area or region, we haven't figured it out yet, to actually come with us in our movement to our next trip to Ottawa, to actually, so that the federal government can hear their voices, and isn't just the governments of the Northwest Territories advocating for the cause, that the people that will be impacted will be at the table. So for those Aboriginal governments that are hearing, here is your first invite. We will be sending formal invites in the mail. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Williams would like to add.
Yeah, just in terms of community housing support plans, you know, these are critical for our success moving forward. We want to have a community-based solution for housing. You know, we want to know what are their needs now, what are their future needs. You know, communities are going to grow, some are going to get smaller. So, you know, we're working with MACA because community planning is a big part of it for lot development. We're also working with Service Canada. Service Canada is willing to partner with us and the community governments on these community housing plans. So that's having three levels of government working together. It's very encouraging that they see there's a need because really it'll inform our future investments in all communities. So I look forward to rolling out these community housing plans. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Williams. Just on slide 10, it talked about program vacant housing and utilizing that. So does this include market rent units that are sitting vacant in some of the smaller communities? Thank you, Minister Cook.
Oh, vacant house, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't hear what you were talking, so I had to confirm. Yes, we are looking at repurposing some of the market rental housing. It is going to be something we need to look carefully at, because if we give them all away to public housing, then we're going to have the screaming, we have no housing for nurses and doctors and RCMP. So, but we're at the process of looking at it now and trying to determine a proper timeline. How long can they sit vacant? When I hear they've been in there years, that tells me we have a big problem. So we will be repurposing, we're looking at it now, but the hardest part is defining what timeline is appropriate to let them sit, to make sure that we meet the needs of people, essential services and communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Cochrane, I appreciate that. Mr. Beaulieu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have two comments. The Housing Corporation, does the Housing Corporation have a plan to divest public housing units?
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is talking about our lease-to-own program that we're working in the smaller communities. So there's two things. If the rent supplement program and the NGO supplement program work well in the market communities, then we would more focus in that realm versus taking on more public housing units in the market communities, because it costs us more to have a public housing unit than to actually rent supplement. So we're looking at that. We haven't made a determination, but that's one area. In the smaller communities, we are looking at people that, because we have, like I said, we have people that are making nothing to people that are making like $100,000 that are in public housing. So we're looking at the people that are in the higher range. I don't want to set people up to fail. But if they can afford to pay their own utilities, take care of their own place, if they haven't wrecked their homes, if they haven't caused lots of disturbances, and if they have paid their rent continuously, then we're looking to move those people, if they can't get a mortgage with the bank, we want to move them into a rent-to-own program so that they will own their own home, because home ownership is the answer. It brings pride in people. We need to get people off the system. Like I say many times, when I go into the communities and I hear people say, I can't wait till I'm 18 and I can get an income support check and a public housing unit, that is not where I want to see our people go. So I want to do my part in actually helping people so that they can take pride in themselves and their communities again. So yes, we're looking at getting rid of some of the public housing units, not getting rid of them all, but actually moving people that have the ability to take care of their own into home ownership through either our current mortgage path program or else lease-to-own program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister Cochrane. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you. I just want to offer a comment on that before I go into my next question. I think using your coordinated income threshold, you could slide the scale right down to a zero payment, you know, so that's something that would make it easier to get divest of public housing, but the individuals could still afford it because of the way the coordinated income threshold was structured. The other thing is a leveraging program. I think one of the things that would bring big returns to the Northwest Territories, never mind the public housing or never mind the NWT Housing Corporation, but an example would be individuals in this community of Yellowknife, where you have probably a couple of thousand units of people who are getting to the age when they need to either move or because they can no longer afford that, or even in the small communities, that is the case, because they don't have they have money, but they can't, not enough to do all of the things necessary to keep their cost of living down. So would the Housing Corporation consider some sort of a leveraging program, depending on the income, how much money can be leveraged with how much money? So if a guy's making, like you said, $60,000, maybe an individual making $60,000 in Fort Resolution would be able to, can afford to pay, above 60, we'll say, because that's been your cutoff. So if an individual was making, say, 80 and needs $20,000 to energize their house or make their house more energy efficient, windows, doors, insulation, alternative heat, as an example, then that individual would reduce their cost of living and still put money into the market. So if they have $10,000 saved and they can leverage 10 more to replace all their windows, as an example, then that's very good for the economy. And if you can replicate that in a city like this, it would be just, it would really drive the economy. In 1999, when the Housing Corporation put out MDAP, and they sold 499 houses in the Northwest Territories during that period of MDAP. During that time, all of the people that provide flooring, TVs, even TVs, paint, their business went way up. So that really, the money came from RWED. It didn't come from the NWT Housing Corporation. I think that these two gentlemen were still with us back then. And the money came from RWED because they viewed that as an economic development type of function. And they gave the Housing Corporation $10,000 for each house that for individuals wanted to buy. They then moved into their new homes and needed new TVs and new flooring and new paint and stuff like that. It really drove the economy. It was very, very positive for the economy. Housing Corporation can do that type of a program that will be positive for the economy for essentially half the price you will drive the economy. Like in small communities, I talk about strategic spending. That's something that's probably an area where you could really gain a lot of benefits for the community.
Mr. Bulliam, Minister Cochrane.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments. It's important to work with MLAs in this work, especially some MLAs have been around a long time, not only in the government, but also within the private sector and know the needs of people. So it's important. Some of our programs do touch into that, our Care Major, our Care Minor. We're doing a senior study that currently that actually is looking at the needs, not only about how many seniors, but what do they want? When I went into some of the seniors' facilities, and I thought they looked like closets, and I'm embarrassed by it, and said, that will not happen during my term. So we're actually looking at trying to find out what are the needs of people before we build these units. So, and the other thing, too, is our lease-to-own program. I am not selling people lease-to-own and just giving them the public housing as they are. I will not, again, let people just take on our problems. I have committed that all the lease-to-own programs that will be moved into that, their homes will be fixed up before they take on that lease-to-own, and that will, all of these things will bring economy and jobs into the communities. So I hear you, we're working on it, and I know we have more to go, but meeting housing need and building economy are kind of hand in hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simpson, this, and being cognitive of the time, this will be the last individual we'll be questioning today.
Thank you. I just have a simple yes or no question. The new program for seniors who earn under 60,000, there will be no co-payment. You mentioned earlier. So what, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe there are still people who would qualify, but they made that co-payment years ago, and they're still waiting for work to be done. So if there are people who have this co-payment sitting with housing, and the work is yet to be done, are they going to be refunded if they are eligible under the new program? Are they going to get that co-payment back? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochrane.
So yes, I will look into that for sure. The most disheartening thing I've heard from the MLA is that we have people sitting with co-payments for years. This is new information to me, and it will be something that will be a priority to be addressed. So for Monday, I've told, just let my team know that they have proposals to write. By next week, Friday, just letting you guys know, I want to know what's going on with these co-payments that are sitting for years, if we have any, and how many we have. So yes, we'll be addressing that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Maybe you can work with the MLA and he can provide some information to you to help the staff as well. At this point in time, I'd like to thank the minister. I know that we've gone over our time limit and that, but I mean, it's a very important topic. I appreciate you taking the time and to meet with us at the earliest convenience for yourself. And I know we were looking at the 6th, but we were able to fit it in today, and I greatly appreciate it, and thank you. Any closing comments, Minister Cochrane?
Just want to say how excited I am to be the housing minister. We have a lot of work. I want to really congratulate my team. I have pushed them more hard than I've ever pushed anybody in my whole life, my whole career work, but they have lived up. And so I can't say enough how much that the Housing Corporation team has pulled together. And this is not about me. This is about their work. So congratulations to all of you that sit here and all the people that you look after. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane, and I think actually you can see by your team's commitment, excitement to answer questions here as well is very prevalent on the work and the commitment that they're doing, and I too would like to thank them. And at this point in time, I'd like to adjourn the meeting, and we'll adjourn to P&P and